The note trembled in his hand as Opa Chandler scribbled out his final words to a cold, indifferent world. "You're killing an innocent man," he insisted, with his last ragged breaths. Only he knew whether or not that claim held any truth, but his victims, they were unquestionably innocent, and their roughly 2 decades-long quest for justice all began with one mother's dream. For 36-year-old Joe Rogers, life on the dairy farm had become joyless and mundane. Her husband Hal buried himself in work, while teenage daughters Michelle and Christy grew more withdrawn by the day, shoulders bowed under some invisible weight. In reality, a predator had shattered their innocence. Hal's own brother, John, who lived right there on the property in a trailer. Eccentric and friendless, John had brutally abused young Michelle for years, right under the family's nose. By the time his crimes came to light, she was but a shell of a girl, too broken to even testify against her tormentor. Watching her family unravel, Joe felt powerless, until an idea took hold. She would take the girls away, just the 3 of them, on a road trip adventure far from this place of pain. Yes, that was what they needed to heal and reconnect. Florida sunshine to wash away the darkness and bring back her daughter's smiles. On May 26, 1989, bursting with hope, Joe packed up her worn-out station wagon and headed south. As mile after mile of open road spooled out before them, the Rogers women dared imagine better days ahead, if only fleetingly, for evil has a way of ensnaring those who seek respite in the light. Their last road trip would plunge them all into eternal darkness instead. The first leg brought them 500 miles from their Ohio home, down Interstate 75 into Georgia, where they spent the night before completing the journey to Jacksonville. After hitting up all the hotspots in northern Florida, they gradually worked their way south through the state, with Orlando being their next big stop. The nonstop action left the excited but exhausted Joe writing a postcard back home to Hal, amused by her daughters dragging her everywhere. By Thursday, June 1st, Tampa was their last destination before looping back home. As they searched for directions, an approaching stranger caught their attention. The 30-something man with sandy blonde hair kindly offered help, mentioning he too hailed from Ohio. After jotting down directions to Days Inn, he extended an invite to watch the sunset on his boat that evening. The spontaneous offer and his friendly demeanor put the women at ease. They accepted, and he told them how to find his blue and white vessel before sending them on their way. The Rogers checked into their motel room around lunchtime. While the girls probably relaxed on the beach that afternoon, Joe likely tried catching up on some much-needed sleep. Later at the restaurant next to the Days Inn, a businessman from Texas spotted the smiling trio around 7:30 p.m., just an hour before their meeting with their new acquaintance at the boat ramp. Back in the room, the Giddy sisters snapped photos to commemorate the special trip. Michelle's sunburnt skin glowed as she sat barefoot on the floor in a swimsuit. Another shot captured the spectacular bay view from their balcony. Around 8:30 p.m., the excited trio then set off for their evening cruise under the stars. If only the bay's serene beauty that night reflected what was to come. 5 days later, on June 4th, a passing sailboat drifted through the same calm turquoise waters of Tampa Bay, passengers content under gentle winds and cloudless skies. Their leisurely voyage took a nightmarish turn when they noticed a strange object bobbing in the distance. As they cautiously approached, the figure slowly came into focus, the lifeless body of a young woman floating face down. The Coast Guard arrived shortly after to find the victim's wrists tightly bound behind her back, while a rope attached to her neck to a heavy concrete block, weighing the body down in the water. Just as the crew managed to heave the corpse from the depths below, another radio call crackled through. A second bound nude body had surfaced 2 miles north. Barely minutes later, a third followed. Over the coming days, autopsies unveiled unsettling revelations about the women's demise. None carried identification, but evidence showed all 3 had been tossed into the bay alive, then presumably drowned after inhaling water, while tethered helplessly to the concrete blocks. The advanced decomposition suggested they had likely perished a few days prior. Investigators now face the monumental task of determining who these victims were and how they wound up dead in the unforgiving waters of Tampa Bay. On June 8th, detectives caught their first break. Staff from Days Inn Rocky Point had grown concerned when guests in room 251 seemingly vanished days ago, abandoning all their belongings. The manager connected the disturbing dots. The 3 females missing since June 1st matched the descriptions of those recently found dead floating around Tampa waters. Indeed, he confirmed the room had been booked under Ohio native Joan Rogers, along with her teen daughters, Michelle and Christy, now with names and hometowns. Investigators contacted Joan's husband, Hal, in Wilshire, Ohio, after providing dental records to accurately identify the drowned females. Hal's worst nightmares became reality. His beloved wife and baby girls had their lives brutally stolen far from the comfort of their Midwestern home. Local police understandably placed Hal as an initial suspect, given his immediate family turning up dead hours from home. But his frequent public breakfast and dinners at Wilshire restaurants while the 3 vacationed provided an airtight alibi, with evidence pointing to the women having entered the water mid-bay, drowning somewhere else, before currents eventually carried them to populated docks and beaches. Detectives refocused their probe on Tampa links, retrieving Rogers' abandoned vehicle from the Courtney Campbell Causeway boat ramp uncovered the first lead. A brochure inside featured distinctive handwriting pointing the way to Days Inn, where Joan herself had then penned directions to this very boat launch. The implication was clear. Someone had led them to the motel before luring them out to the remote boat ramp that same evening. Moreover, the waters where each woman met their horrific demise indicated they were likely far from shore when thrown overboard on their final voyage. Months passed without progress before a startling revelation by Canadian resident Judy Blair redirected the investigation. Visiting Florida the same early June week, she too had accepted a sunset cruise invitation from a middle-aged Ohio native who owned a blue and white boat. But her outing took a sinister turn as the man grew aggressive minutes after shoving off, raping her at gunpoint miles from shore. Beyond the harrowing similarities, Judy's vivid recounting of the traumatizing assault painted an image of her attacker that closely matched the helpful stranger who had approached the Rogers women that fateful afternoon. Hopeful this dramatic breakthrough could at least bring Joan, Michelle, and Christy's merciless killer to justice, authorities ramped up efforts to identify this violent offender loose in the Tampa Bay area. Exposing the murderer ultimately hinged on publicizing the obscure handwriting scrawled across Rogers' tourist brochure months earlier, hoping someone might recognize the unusual style. Billboards soon lined highways for miles around Tampa, displaying the cryptic directions in enlarged font. Who knows these directions? Who killed the Rogers family? The unconventional gambit delivered. Local woman Joanne Steffi phoned detectives days after the billboards went up to report recognizing the odd handwriting. It was her neighbor, named Opa Chandler. Further inquiries revealed Chandler resided only a mile from the secluded boat ramp where Rogers' vehicle was abandoned. And curiously, records showed he had suspiciously radioed his wife from offshore the very night the Rogers drowned, implausibly claiming engine troubles delayed his expected return. The final damning revelation came when analysis positively identified Chandler's palm print on Rogers' brochure, cementing corroboration he was the helpful stranger at the motel and later captained the doomed voyage carrying Michelle, Christy, and Joe to their untimely deaths off the coast of Tampa Bay. An arrest was promptly secured. After Chandler's September 1992 arrest, Judy Blair pointed him out in both a photo lineup and live identification, without hesitation or doubt, as the man who had violently assaulted her years prior. Hoping to strengthen their death penalty case, detectives later uncovered chilling admissions Chandler shared with his daughter, Crystal Mays, while secretly visiting her back in Ohio to evade the intensifying manhunt. He confessed to not only Judy's rape, but also murdering 3 others in Tampa. Chandler attempted lies and denial to write off the allegations, including a shifting alibi, highlighting engine issues from a phantom gas leak. He kept saying, "You're punishing an innocent man." But damning testimony dismissed the claims as technically implausible, coupled with forensic proof of his presence that dreadful night, ultimately unraveled feeble attempts to explain away involvement. On September 29, 1994, just after 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found him decisively guilty in the Rogers horrific slayings. One by one, all jurors firmly recommended death. The outcome brought long-awaited justice, but could never fill the void left by 3 innocent lives, cut devastatingly short. In the end, no justice can ever undo tragedy or replace those lost too soon. On November 15, 2011, Chandler paid the ultimate price for his crime, executed by lethal injection after over 17 years of languishing on death row without a single visitor. Even in death, the monster's dark legacy continued to haunt the innocent. In February 2014, DNA evidence conclusively tied Chandler to yet another savage murder, 23-year-old Evelise Barrios Begaris. For profilers, the development came as no surprise. Experts had long speculated the calculating killer had almost certainly hunted victims before. For the small but strong Wilshire community, what emerged from unspeakable tragedy was a renewed perspective about cherishing their loved ones and recognizing evil sometimes hides disturbingly close. The Rogers remain forever woven into the town's social fabric, and their memories spun daily reflection about appreciating the now. Because as Hal understands all too painfully, your entire world can change unexpectedly in but a moment's notice.